Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our call today. I'm Kelly Smallridge, President and CEO of the Business Development Board of Palm Beach County. And we're working really hard for the third consecutive week to bring insight and resources to you, our business leaders in Palm Beach County. Today's Town Hall Conference features two of the most experienced business leaders in our market who serve as advisors to Fortune 100 and 500 companies, but most importantly, who also understand our local economy in the third consecutive week of trying to navigate the serious economic impact of COVID-19. I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Brian Garner of NextEra Energy. Mr. Garner is the Communications Director for NextEra Energy, parent company to Florida Power and Light. He supports the company's development of renewable energy projects beyond Florida and leads FPL's media relations efforts during emergencies, including hurricanes and, of course, this pandemic. Prior to his work at NextEra Energy, Brian worked as a journalist for 15 years, most notably as an award-winning reporter and bureau chief for WPTV News Channel 5. Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for listening in today. Before I introduce our accomplished guests today, I'd like to ask that everyone please mute your phones so we're not interrupted by any background noise. And if during the call you have any questions, please chat with our BDB host by hovering over the bottom of your screen and clicking on the chat box on your taskbar. I'll then ask your questions to our guests here in this forum. We have some fascinating content to share with you here today. Perspectives on our current situation from two of the most trusted and connected business leaders and advisors to Fortune 100 companies. Our first guest is Michael Ainsley. He's been a resident of Palm Beach and a strong community building force on the island for more than 25 years. He's the former worldwide CEO of Sotheby's, a director of Lehman Brothers during the 2008 bankruptcy, and its chairman for 5 years after the bankruptcy. He is also the former president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and he is the author of A Nose for Trouble, which presents the theme we're most interested in here today, strength in the face of adversity. And that sometimes we discover the best part of ourselves by living through our most difficult experiences. Michael Ainsley, welcome.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Kelly.
Our second guest served as Florida's 34th U.S. Senator. George Lemieux succeeded in passing important legislation on healthcare fraud, export promotion, rating agency reform, small business promotion, as well as a treaty resolution on tactical nuclear weapons. He served as Florida's Deputy Attorney General, overseeing more than 400 attorneys, and served as the Chief of Staff to Governor Charlie Crist, overseeing all state agencies and operations. He is now the Chairman of the Board of Directors for the Gunster Law Firm, which has 12 offices across Florida. Welcome, Senator Lemieux.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Kelly. Pleased to be here.
Gentlemen, each of you has had extensive experience managing crises. I'd like to begin by asking you each to say a few words about the crises you faced in your careers and what management lessons you took away from those experiences that might be able to help the business leaders we have listening in here today on this call, as they are going to be faced with some very tough decisions of their own in the days and weeks ahead. Michael Ainsley, let's begin with you. You can start us off.
Thanks, Brian. And thank you to Kelly and her team at the Business Development Board for the great job they're doing in informing and supporting our business community here in Palm Beach County. Wow, what a serious challenge we all face today, less than 1 month into a full-blown global pandemic. Let's start this call by saying thank you to the amazing doctors, nurses, and medical care professionals who are out there risking their lives to help save ours. Thank you. We owe them a huge debt of gratitude. You know, this $2 trillion economic stabilization package of rescue and support for Americans is unprecedented, and it's really far-reaching. It's going to help individuals, families, and many of the hard-hit industries, including some of the anchors of Florida's economy. It'll help financial markets and even more. You know, it was created very quickly, but it was done thoughtfully, looking at every impacted area of our economy. It may not be enough, but sure is a good start, in my opinion. Each one of you that has a business with under 500 employees should be looking at filing. Today is the first day you can file for support under the Payroll Protection Program. If it's implemented as quickly and as well as it can be, it should keep most of our smaller businesses and nonprofits as well viable for the near term. But moving on from that, let me talk a minute about what you as a leader in your organization might be able to do to help your group, your team through this crisis. First is honesty. We must be brutally honest. None of us knows how long this is going to last. We're hopeful that the growth of infections will flatten and begin declining in 6 weeks or maybe 2 months, but it could be 3. This is where it comes on to our responsibility. Much of that depends upon us, all of us, making some sacrifices and following the relentless stream of medical advice that we're all getting. Every one of us needs to be fierce with our family, our friends, our colleagues in order to stop this spread. You know, a big part of being a leader at this historic moment is based upon trust. The trust that each of us has built with our stakeholders, our customers, our friends, our public officials, our colleagues. Trust is critical to getting support, especially when nobody really knows all the answers. I've been a longtime alum and trustee of Vanderbilt University up in Nashville. We have a new chancellor there, Dr. Daniel Diermeyer. He has special expertise in crisis management, which is a subject he taught at Stanford Business School. He has just written an excellent paper, which I recommend strongly to you. It's called Crisis Management Essentials for Pandemics. He just wrote it 2 weeks ago. And it's on the BDB website where you can look at it and download it if you like. The 4 major factors that he influences that influence the level of trust one can enjoy are the following: empathy, transparency, expertise, and commitment. Dr. Diermeyer's research shows that the most important element of these is empathy. An effective crisis manager behaves in such a way that he or she encourages people to believe that their organization really cares. Stakeholders view the empathetic organization not as just some anonymous provider of a good or a service, but as a real member of the community, someone that's expected to show care and empathy. Let me turn to some of my own personal crisis experiences. As Brian said, I served as chairman of the board of Lehman after the bankruptcy in 2008. That was a huge challenge, a very scary time. I also faced my own health crisis as a teenager, almost dying. I dealt with a price fixing scandal at Sotheby's where I had been CEO for a decade and my successor engaged in illegal activities. I wrote a book, as was mentioned, to show how tough life can be, and yet how learning from these toughest moments can help you rise to challenges like the one we're now facing. This is where you need strong ethical leadership and also have to accept that there are a lot of things that we can't control. I've given a lot of thought to the parallels and the differences between the 2008 crisis, the global financial crisis, and this one. First, and obviously, this is bigger and more global. It came on much quicker. It's affecting far more people more quickly. This is a disease we're fighting, not a big bank, some institution that's easy to dislike. In my opinion, the government's economic response has been superior at this crisis. They've been quick, decisive. They had comprehensive programs that have been designed for most, if not all, of the sectors of our economy. And by and large, bipartisanship prevailed with a few bumps along the way. So I think Secretary Mnuchin and the congressional leaders have put together a good package. Now, I've hearkened back to the 2008 crisis. In my book, I talk about some of the mistakes I think Secretary Paulson made back then. The Fed stopped providing overnight funding for Lehman. This was a huge policy mistake that has cost the world's massive unemployment and dislocation. Lehman had plenty of collateral to borrow against. They simply ran out of cash. Lehman made mistakes, as did others. We were too leveraged, as was Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. Today, and I want to make this point, banks have 1/3 the leverage that was allowed back in the 08 period. They're much safer. I don't think we're going to see bank failures or bank difficulties in this crisis. But in retrospect, Paulson and Bernanke did not estimate properly the cost and the damage from a Lehman bankruptcy. By the way, I don't know if you're aware of this, but of the billions that were put out through TARP and other government support programs, it has all been paid back with $130 billion profit to the federal government, much of that coming from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Even AIG's support of $180 billion, which I refuse to call a bailout, has been fully repaid with a profit to the government of $22 billion. So let me come to a close and turn it over to the Senator. At this time of crisis, my own experience gives me actually a lot of confidence. We will get through this. We have an incredible country, an incredible region here in South Florida, full of talented leaders with grit and ingenuity to solve this problem and get us back on a growth path. You know, gratitude is something very special. I try and practice it daily with my wife and daughter. We sit around and ask each other what we're grateful for this day. Let me close with a touch of humor and list a few things that I am grateful for. Things that did not exist very short few years ago. And without these, our life would have been a lot tougher in the last few days. So here we go. Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, Instacart, Peloton, Uber Eats, Venmo, and I could go on for pages. But let me assure you, 5 years from now and even sooner, there will be a whole new list of services, products, technologies, and they will be making our lives safer and much healthier. And they are being created right now out of this maelstrom. I wish all of you a safe and healthy time in these difficult days. Now let me pass it over to Senator Lemieux.
Thank you, Michael. You're a tough act to follow. Those were some beautiful words. Let me try to take off on some of the things that Michael was saying in terms of leadership, and then also I'll give some personal stories about different leadership issues and emergencies that I've been around, led through, and been around great leaders and experienced their wisdom during those difficult times. I think the points about leadership and what a leader needs to do that Michael said are exactly right. Trust and empathy are extremely important. Let me add a few that I think are also important. One is that the leader must be visible. They must be present. They must be speaking. And in fact, I think they need to over-communicate. When I say over-communicate is that when you're a leader, you've said something, you've had a press conference, you feel like, well, I've already said that, but not everybody heard you. And even if they heard you once, they may need to hear you again. So constant communication is really the order of the day at a crisis like this, because people are insecure and they need to be reassured. And watching these press conferences, and it's the reason why the president and the governor are having press conferences multiple times a day or every day, is to constantly be communicating. And for us who run businesses, the same goes for us. We need to be constantly communicating with our employees. We need to be honest with them, to Michael's point. We need to be transparent, but we also need to be telling them what the facts are and what our plan is going forward so that they can feel some comfort. And for those of us who are all working remotely, keep working, which is what we all need to be doing to the best of our ability. If we have jobs that we're still in, we need to keep working. We need our companies to continue to flourish so that we can employ folks, so that the economy can continue till we get through this difficult time. I would also say that leaders need to be an expert on the facts. You can't make good decisions unless you have the facts to make those decisions. Sometimes those facts are hard to gather. And when you are in the heat of battle right now, you can have that battlefield confusion. It's very important for leaders to try to slow down time as much as they can, to not be panicked, to make decisions quicker than they need to get the information they need, the real information they need, so that they can make the best decisions they can in the moment. We don't know what's going on around us with perfect certainty. We never do. And maybe in these times it's even more difficult, but trying to make decisions based upon facts and not emotions is really important. the last thing I will say is that this is always true for leaders, but it's even more important in these times, is that leaders need to be decisive. Leaders need to get the information, consider all the outcomes, and then they need to make a decision, and then they need to move on to the next decision. The failure to act is an act in and of itself. And that inaction, or the paralysis around failing to act, has its own consequences, which oftentimes can be worse than not acting at all. So I would add that to the very good list that Michael put forward. My experience around crisis times, in my time in state government and in the federal government, I was in the Attorney General's office during 04 and 05 when we had 8 hurricanes in the state. Dealt with Governor Bush at the time when he was the governor of our state of Florida, as we dealt with what seemed like a hurricane that would come every other week during the summer, and the devastation that those hurricanes would cause. And what I really learned from Governor Bush and watching him in those circumstances is some of the things I just described: obtaining the facts, communicating, making decisive decisions. And as leaders, we have to push people to get what we need to get done. When you see the president negotiating with General Motors about making ventilators and not getting, and I'm not here to say who was right or who was wrong in that discussion because I don't know all the details, but eventually just saying, we're going to invoke the Defense Authorization Act and you are going to make them because we need them. Leaders have to push in these difficult situations, reopen that hospital, get those tests done more quickly, whatever needs to be done. Leaders have to push, and when leaders set ambitious goals, Americans will achieve them. We've been doing that since the beginning of our republic. So leaders have to be ambitious and aggressive in obtaining those goals. And I saw that during the time of all those hurricanes. I also saw in my time in the Senate when we were dealing with the financial meltdown of the 08-09 period, and then also fighting 2 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, that you needed decisive leadership and you needed people to work together. And that's what is really refreshing, as Michael was saying, about what's happened in Washington here in the past couple of weeks, is that we've had 3 pieces of major legislation passed, the last one being the CARES Act, which is an enormous relief package. To put it in context, we're going to spend in the next few months as much as we spend in a year's time on all discretionary domestic spending. And this is going to hopefully give employers of 500 or less the ability to keep people on their payroll, which will keep them with the ability to take care of their families and shop at the store and do all the things that will keep our economy moving on until we get through this difficult time. Look forward to talking more about how we're going to get through this and what it's going to look like as we continue our conversation. The good news is we are getting through it. And right now we're, if you will, taking the medicine that we need to take as a society in order to get through this. The social distancing that we've done, the statewide stay-at-home order that Governor DeSantis has issued, the previous stay-at-home orders that have been in places like Palm Beach County for weeks now, are doing the right thing. They are slowing this spread. And we'll talk more in a few moments about what else we can do and what the future looks like. But we will get through this and we will be better for it. Brian?
Gentlemen, thank you very much for those opening remarks and certainly for the advice you have for the leaders on this call, coming to bear some of the experience that you have had through different crises. As we consider this crisis that we're in the middle of now, the speed with which it has come on and impacted us, both from a health perspective and now from an economic perspective, is really breathtaking. So far, we have seen in excess of 10 million jobless claims in just the last 2 weeks. We've seen the stock market lose nearly 1/3 of its value, and our country plunge into recession virtually overnight. As Michael said, we do not know if this is going to be another month, 2 months, 3 months, but bearing on your experience, what additional market reactions or disruptions do you anticipate as we move into this a little bit farther? Senator Lemieux, let's begin with you.
Well, I think the news is going to unfortunately continue to be bad. The numbers of people who have the disease is going to go up. Unfortunately, the number of fatalities is going to go up. And that's in part due to the fact that we are in the part of the curve now where we're testing more. So we're going to get more confirmed positives. And we're in the part of the curve now where people have had the disease for some period of time and a certain percentage of those people are going to pass away. So I think that the markets, while they have factored in, I'm no economic forecaster, but while the markets have factored in much of this information, it's my view that the continuing drumbeat of bad information over the next few weeks is going to dampen the markets. But there's going to be a point where more people are recovering from the disease than new cases. And when we start to see more and more people recovering, and if you go to the Johns Hopkins website, for example, which I check on every day, which has got a great dashboard of what's happening all over the world, and you start to see Americans recovering, that good news in the system is going to help. What also is going to help is that the testing is going to be much more prevalent and much quicker. The state of Florida right now is receiving now and this weekend tests that will give confirmations in 5 to 15 minutes. We're going to go into a phase and a regime where people are going to be tested. Almost everyone's going to be tested. People might be tested multiple times. That's going to give us much better information on how to quarantine and our procedures and policies going forward. So once we start to see people coming off the disease, once we start to have quicker and better testing, I think that the markets will recover. At some point, we're going to go to a new phase out of the phase that we're in now. American Enterprise Institute put out a great article just recently about the different phases of this. And the next phase is one where there hasn't been where there's been a sustained reduction for a 14-day period in the number of new cases. Once that happens, social distancing can get lifted. We can start to get back to normal. I think that the economy will recover. I can't predict to you how strong that recovery will be, but once we get through that difficult time, and whether it's the next 4, 6, 8 weeks, I don't know, but I think that's about the time frame that we're talking about.
Michael Ainsley, what additional market disruptions do you anticipate?
I think the biggest market disruptions are pretty obvious, and they're really going to be, I think, really fundamental shifts in the way people use their time and their resources. I think the industries that are going to be most severely changed, and I'm sure they're all trying to figure out what their new paradigm is, are travel and hotels. I think the cruise ship industry, I think the commercial real estate business is going to be dramatically changed. We have learned an awful lot about how we can work, do business, communicate, share, be in touch. We don't have to all be in the same place at the same time, as we're proving this very moment. I think, though, from a South Florida point of view, a lot of our industries have very bright futures. Life sciences, telecom, agribusiness, distribution. I think distribution is going to become even more important in terms of getting goods and services out, mostly goods out quickly. I think residential real estate is going to do great in South Florida. I'm really very concerned about the economies of New York and other places where this is hitting hardest, because they're going to be basically wanting to move to Florida and be down here with us. So I think there are a lot of other very exciting opportunities in some of these industries that we happen in this region to be very strong in, healthcare being another one. Avionics, I don't know about exactly how the aircraft industry is going to deal with this. Obviously, there are good things for private planes, and a lot of our industry, I know, supports that industry down here, but there will have to be some changes in the way the commercial air travel business operates. That's really been a model that I think people are not going to have as much trust in going forward.
You spoke at the beginning of the call about the CARES Act, a $2 trillion, really unprecedented aid package that the government passed in a very short amount of time. Today, as you mentioned, is the beginning of opportunity for small business owners to apply for some of those paycheck protection loans, up to $350 billion worth of loans. I understand even today there's a lot of uncertainty about how those loans are going to be implemented. Lenders have some uncertainty about how to participate in that. At the end of the day, do you think this plan will have its intended effect to try and preserve jobs during this period of uncertainty? Michael Ainsley, let's start with you.
I think it will. If it gets rolled out quickly, and that's the big if. I understand that the SBA is authorizing a lot more banks, and other financial institutions to make the loans. I've actually viewed one of the applications, and I must say I've looked at a lot of government forms over my life. This is the simplest one I've ever seen. It's 2 pages long. At the top, it says, what was your average monthly payroll in 2019? How many employees do you have? And what is 2.5 times the average monthly payroll? And that's the loan amount. And then you check about 6 boxes saying you're not a criminal and you're not this and you're not that. And that's what it's a lot of it is self, approval by yourself. And so I think if this gets rolled out quickly, this will help. And it's also, at first I was skeptical because it requires you to get that loan forgiven. You have to keep your employees on your payroll. So a lot of people that have furloughed people or have laid people off can still get the loans, but they will not get the forgiveness that others will get.
Senator Lemieux, what do you think? Will this Paycheck Protection Program have the effect of being able to preserve jobs, or are these companies already under so much pressure that they're going to have to enact layoffs or furloughs?
I think it's going to preserve jobs in a lot of business sectors. In hospitality and in restaurants, a lot of people have already been laid off, so it may not help in those sectors. Michael's right, it's a pretty easy form. There can be some complexity. We're spending a lot of time at the Gunster Law Firm advising clients on the form, based upon your size. Affiliates can trigger how many folks you have in determining whether you get to 500 or not. So there's a little bit of complexity, but all in all, for the government, it's a pretty good job. As I understand it today, the banks are having a difficult time opening their portals, and that some banks are saying we're not starting today, and some banks started and got shut down because of the overwhelming demand. That's to be expected with so many people applying. I think that'll sort itself out over the next few days, and I'm hopeful the government will get that money in the hand of employers quickly. I do think it's a meaningful amount. It's $349 billion. I was on a call with Senator Rubio this morning, who we really can give thanks to because he's the principal author of this provision of the Payroll Protection Program. He mentioned that we might need to extend it beyond the 8 weeks. And I saw that Speaker Pelosi today said it might need to be extended to 16 weeks. So that really goes back to the earlier question of how long are we going to be shut down? How long are we going to be under these stay-at-home orders in places like Florida? That's going to really impact the duration. But I'm hopeful that it's going to be helpful to our businesses, that the money will arrive soon.
You talked at the beginning of the call about leadership and some of the things that you've learned about leadership. I was reading in Forbes magazine this week, Bob Zukis from the USC Marshall School of Business wrote, "Well, many small, medium, and large businesses may not survive this crisis. Every survivor will need to adapt, that the future of business is not about bouncing back into form, what we've known previously. It's about renewal and adapting to new paradigms, a new normal." Do you agree with that statement? And if so, what does the new normal look like? How do you make those decisions about how to adapt? Let's start with you, Michael Ainsley.
I definitely agree with that. I think the winners and the success going forward will come from people who come up with new ideas, new ways of solving. There's so many obvious, giant, glaring mistakes that we've made in terms of preparation for this kind of a healthcare crisis. That creates opportunities. Obviously, we've got to look at it from both a public policy and a private sector point of view, but I think there are going to be a lot of new opportunities. And the people who are out there looking for those and finding them are going to be the successful entrepreneurs going forward. So I think it's a time of great opportunity, but as your professor said, you can't do it the same old way.
Senator Lemieux, what do you think? What does it take to adapt in this sort of crisis situation?
Well, I think you're seeing it happening as we speak. You're seeing, restaurants that didn't really have a to-go platform changing their whole restaurant structure so that they're basically operating a to-go platform. I think you'll see many different businesses who have to survive by doing something different during this time period. Think about that as a business line, or perhaps their only business focus once this crisis is over. And as was said earlier by Michael, we're accelerating the transformation that virtual officing, virtual education, all of these things that we're being forced to do right now, they were all happening. I mean, you could get on a conference call like this prior to the epidemic, but they just weren't as frequent because there wasn't the necessity for them. We are being pushed probably 5 years faster than we would have been into the ability to work remotely, to work telephonically and over video in a way that we just couldn't have expected. So I think that's going to change things. I agree with the point on commercial real estate. I think we're all going to think about our real estate holdings based upon this. We were doing that already, but we're going to do it in a much more profound way. What will be really interesting to me is how society interacts with each other in the new world, in the post-pandemic world. Are we going to still shake hands? Are we going to still look at each other and keep a distance? Or will we recover and kind of go back the way we were? As hard as it is to think about this, we have to assume that there's going to be another one of these viruses and that we have to be ready for it. And, we saw how well South Korea did because it had already experienced SARS and MERS and other viruses, so they were ready. There's the other thing I would add to that is there's going to be a lot of balancing going forward between our civil liberties and our security. Right now, we are sacrificing our civil liberties. We are under an emergency order ordering us to stay at home and only to visit essential businesses. There in foreign countries, people are being tracked by the data location devices that they carry on their smartphones. And they're using that in places like South Korea, now starting in Europe, to quarantine people based upon the fact that now I have the virus, you were with me 10 minutes ago, you're getting quarantined. These are big questions for us as a society that we're going to have to deal with, because there's always been this balance between safety and liberty. Right now, we are erring gravely on the side of safety, as we should be, but when this passes, we're going to have those discussions when we try to get back to a new normal.
Absolutely. You each spoke in a very positive way about the CARES Act and that it's much needed. It will hopefully inject some money into the economy and preserve jobs. But as we look back, and you talked about the 2008 financial crisis, it seems like every financial crisis has meant the government injecting more money into the economy, adding more debt to our national debt. Now we have added $2 trillion more to our national debt. What are the implications of that over the long term? First off, who's going to be buying that debt, and what does it mean for the next generation? We'll start with you, Senator Lemieux.
Well, the debt and the deficit were the things that concerned me the most when I was in the U.S. Senate, and back then it was a paltry only $11 trillion that we were in debt. We're now going to be $25 trillion after we spend this additional $2 trillion, and we were $1 trillion, running $1 trillion deficit this year and last year in a banner economy. So the voices of fiscal conservatism in the U.S. Congress are very quiet and few. And that's going to have to change at some point, because we've been fortunate to live in a zero interest rate world, or a low interest rate world. And if we ever get to a point again where interest rates are 3, 4, 5%, and the U.S. government has to pay the service charge on all of that debt, it's going to become, it's now the 5th biggest expenditure in the federal budget. It's going to be 4th or 3rd. It'll pass Medicaid. It could pass Medicare and Social Security at some point if it's not reined in. So that is a huge problem, and it's one that our lawmakers seem to have no appetite to want to tackle. And as we, will be interesting, and I'm sure Michael will have an opinion on this too, is that as we sort of vilify China over this virus, and we're in difficult trade negotiation relationships, it should not be lost upon us that China holds a lot of our debt, and that they, along with Japan and others, buy a lot of our debt. And whether that will continue is something that we're going to have to consider. But these are, once we get past the current crises, which we should be devoting all of our attention to right now, these are larger issues that we're going to have to focus on.
Mike Ainsley, are you concerned about adding to the debt in the way we are right now?
No, I'm not, because I think this was a perfect example of where government had to act. And I'm actually very pleased that it acted quickly and with real unanimity. Just think, if we did not have this right now with the, how many job unemployment claims did you say earlier had been filed? 10 million?
10 million in 2 weeks.
Staggering, a staggering number of people who, and I heard another number today that 50%, I had heard Jeb Bush say some time ago that 60 or 70% of Floridians live within 2 paychecks of insolvency. And that is just scary when you think about, more than half of our country really having no idea of what they were going to do had this legislation not passed. At certain times, government must be there for the people, and they were, so far, I think they've stepped up. I'm hoping that the 16-week extension won't be necessary, but I'm glad at least they're already beginning to think about it. We can figure out, as Senator Lemieux says, someday we're going to have to, and it probably has to do with our tax code, and it will have some implications for people that a lot of people don't like. But at some point, we're going to have to address the long-term structural deficits in our social programs and in our existing debt. But now is not the very moment to be doing that.
Gentlemen, you've got a tremendous experience in government and in business. We have a number of business leaders from a wide variety of industries listening in on this call right now. Put yourselves in their shoes for a moment. You're running a business in Palm Beach County or in South Florida. You are trying to navigate this pandemic. What are the 2 or 3 things that you should be thinking about or doing right now to try and put your business and your employees in the best position to survive and thrive through this pandemic? Michael, let's start with you.
Well, I think both George and I have given a number of qualities that have to be shown. Empathy. You've really got to show you care and show that the enterprise and the people that make it up are critical, and that you really know that and show that. Secondly, you've got to just talk. You've really got to be out there communicating, and that's difficult at times with the limitations on getting close to people, but it has to be done. And I think the other thing is, you've really got to be looking forward at what is our business going to be looking like. I'm sure there's some very fundamental rethinking going on in some of these troubled industries, and I don't know what it is, but it's going to take some to win back trust for people spending nights in hotel rooms and cruise ships and airplanes. Not going to be easy. It's not going to be the same as it was. So they've got to be not only dealing with the crisis of the moment, but looking forward at a new paradigm for their business.
Senator Lemieux, business leaders on this call, what 2 or 3 things should they be thinking about doing right now to try and survive and thrive through this crisis?
Well, I agree with everything Michael said, and I would add to that I think liquidity and cash are really important for businesses right now, making sure that they're going to have the cash to be able to meet whatever payroll and rent and other obligations they have for the next couple months. In terms of forecasting, you really need to think that this is an April, May, June problem. So I think that's really important. You need to have the cash. If you can't have the cash to be able to meet your expenses, you're going to have challenges. But there are opportunities with lenders, with landlords and others, people that you have obligations to work out deals so that you can have the cash that you need to be able to make it through this tough time. This is a very different type of emergency than we've ever dealt with before. I don't know what to analogize it to. I mean, we've had these pandemics in this country before. We had them in the late 1800s. There was a yellow fever epidemic. We had it in right after World War I with the flu, the Spanish flu, if you will, that gripped the world. But we haven't had it in recent times. So it's very different than when we dealt with 9/11. It's very different than when we dealt with the 2008 financial crisis. And we all believe that this is going to contract, and we're hopeful that when it contracts, we get back to a new normal. So it's really getting from here to there. It's getting from where we are today to that phase 2, when businesses start to reopen, when people start to go back to their normal lives, when money starts to be spent in the economy again. For most of us, that's where we have to get to. And then for those industries that are going to be peculiarly impacted, like was mentioned earlier, airlines, cruise ship companies, hotels, they're going to have to be tremendously innovative in how they reassure their customers that the product that they're offering is safe. So that they're going to have an extra hurdle to overcome.
Brian,
prior to this pandemic, Michael, did you have something to add?
one more point. I saw yesterday on CNBC the head of Johnson & Johnson, and maybe it was 2 days ago, and they are moving fast with a way of dealing a virus, a product that will basically stop the virus. And they're going through all the drug testing. But one of the things he said is that while they're going through the FDA approvals, they're actually going to build the manufacturing capability to build up to 1 million doses of this, I think, a month. That's a huge commitment. He did not put a number on it, but that is a sign of an empathetic company who's saying, we're going to go spend money in advance of knowing whether it's even ever going to be a product we can sell in order to help the world. And I came away feeling very encouraged by that conversation.
Absolutely. It's a great example of the adaptation you were talking about. I think we have time for one more question. The BDB was sharing with me earlier that before the global pandemic, 2 of the highest migrations of companies were from New York to Florida and from California to Texas. We're going to be under a new paradigm as we emerge from this pandemic. Where do you think companies might migrate once this is all over? And will Palm Beach County still be a destination for new business? Let's begin with you, Michael Ainsley.
Well, I said so earlier, and I strongly believe that it will be. I think one of the things people are going to look at, though, is the healthcare system in the region they want to move to. And we've got some tests ahead of us in that regard, because our hospitals are going to be mightily tested in the next 2 months. We've got some good ones, and we've got some improvements that probably need to be made in our regional healthcare system. But I think that Florida will be one of those most desirable places to move. Obviously, weather and other things are factors to be considered. And I'm sure other desirable other areas will be seeing, I think, movement.
Senator Lemieux, what do you think about the migration of companies post-pandemic?
I think it's only going to be stronger to places like Palm Beach County. To the points Michael made, there was already an inflow of companies coming here because of bad fiscal policy, bad tax policy in the Northeast, plus the fact that we're a beautiful, warm-weathered state. But I think you're going to see more. And, we've been all talking about the new urbanism, and that's been the big trend in development. We're all going to live downtown. We're all going to live in an apartment. Well, maybe not. Look at what's happening in New York City with density. I mean, the reason why Manhattan, in part, is having such a difficult time is that there are so many people concentrated in such a small space. So I think the idea of Florida, which is a land area the size of Great Britain, where we don't have as dense of a population center, even though Southeast Florida from Palm Beach to Miami is dense, it's nowhere near dense as other parts of the country. You can still live in a single family home. You could still, have some space between you and your neighbor. I think that's going to become more and more attractive. So I think Florida, with as much land as we have, as many prominent metro areas that we have, is going to be a great place for businesses to move to. And I think this will further accelerate it.
Well, gentlemen, this has been a really interesting and beneficial conversation, I think, for everybody on the call. I'd like to give our sincere thanks to both Michael Ainsley and Senator George Lemieux for your time and for preparing for this call. We hope everyone who's been listening in today has taken away some perspective that'll help you make decisions to help your family, your business in the days and weeks ahead. On behalf of the Business Development Board, Kelly Smallridge and her team, we'd like to assure you that all members of the Palm Beach County Business Development Board and business community, that we're doing everything we can to make sure you have the information you need to make good decisions. I encourage you to visit bdb.org. Tremendous information on there, not only about the CARES Act, but other information that can help you make smart business decisions during this uncertain time. There will be another call on the BDB next week. Please look for details about that early next week in your email. And if anyone has any questions pertaining to this call or previous calls, please visit the resources page on the website bdb.org. Thank you all for your time today, for staying safe and staying healthy. Be well, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.